Hello everyone, in today's video I will be narrating stories that I found off of Reddit. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But without further ado,
let's get straight into these stories.
I work as a delivery driver for a small courier company. We specialize in same-day deliveries for businesses and individuals, and our clients are spread across the city. One of my regular runs is to a sprawling hospital complex on the outskirts of town. The hospital's layout is confusing at best, a tangled mess of old and new buildings connected by endless hallways and skybridges. Last month, I was assigned a package labeled urgent, pathology department. It was late afternoon, and the hospital was already winding down for the day. The halls were eerily quiet, a sharp contrast to the usual daytime buzz. I followed the signs to pathology, navigating the maze of beige walls and flickery fluorescent lights. When I finally reached the department, the glass doors were locked and the reception area was dark. A sign on the door read, "After hours deliveries, please use the drop box." I'd used the drop box before. It was down a side corridor, tucked into a little alcove. The alcove itself always gave me the creeps. It was dimly lit, and the drop box was an old metal cabinet that groaned loudly whenever you opened it. As I approached, I noticed something strange. The air felt colder, and the usual hum of the hospital's ventilation system was absent. I chalked it up to nerves and slid the package into the drop box. Just as I turned to leave, I heard it, a faint tapping sound, like nails lightly drumming on metal. I froze, my hand still on the drop box handle. The tapping stopped. I told myself it was nothing and started walking back down the hall. The sound followed me, not footsteps, but more tapping, this time faster and more erratic, as if it were scrambling to keep up. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest. I reached the main hallway and glanced over my shoulder. Nothing. The corridor was empty. I turned back and nearly collided with a woman in scrubs. She looked as startled as I felt. "Sorry," I blurted. "Didn't see you there." She didn't respond, just stared at me with an odd expression, something between confusion and fear. Finally, she said, "We shouldn't be here. I was just dropping off a package," I explained, gesturing back toward the pathology wing. Her face went pale. "That wing's been closed for years," she whispered. I laughed nervously, thinking she was joking. "No, I was just there. The drop box is still." My voice trailed off as I noticed her backing away, her eyes wide with terror. Without another word, she turned and hurried down the hall, leaving me standing there, utterly bewildered. I spun around and looked back toward the pathology wing. The corridor I just walked down was now dark. The signs were gone. Even the alcove with the drop box was missing, replaced by a blank wall. I didn't wait to find out what was going on. I ran it. When I got back to the delivery van, I sat there shaking for a long time before finally driving away. The next day, I told my boss I wouldn't take any more deliveries to the hospital. I wish I could say that was the end of it, that after my boss reassigned me to other routes, life went back to normal. But whatever I encountered in that hospital wasn't done with me. About a week later, I was back on my usual route, delivering to offices downtown. It was a bright, sunny day, and the warmth was a welcome distraction from the lingering unease that had been gnawing at me since the hospital incident. Around lunchtime, I parked my van outside a tech startup to drop off a stack of legal documents. The building was one of those modern glass monstrosities, all reflective surfaces and sharp angles. As I waited for the receptionist to sign for the delivery, I glanced at the wall-mounted TV scrolling through security camera feeds from around the building. At first, I didn't pay much attention. The cameras showed the usual sights: the lobby, the parking garage, the rooftop terrace. But then one feed caught my eye. It was grainy and slightly distorted, but I recognized the corridor instantly. It was the same hallway from the pathology wing of the hospital, the one that had vanished. My stomach dropped as I stared at the screen. The corridor looked just as it had that night, dimly lit, with the same worn linoleum floors and flickery fluorescent lights. As I watched, a shadow moved across the frame, darting from one side of the hall to the other. "Everything okay?" the receptionist asked, handing me back the signed paperwork. I nodded quickly, trying to play it cool. "Yeah, thanks. Just noticed something weird on her security feed." She followed my gaze to the screen, then frowned. "That one's not ours. Must be a glitch or something. Not yours," I echoed. My voice sounded distant, even to me. She shrugged. "Yeah, that feed's been popping up randomly for a few days now. We don't even have cameras in a place like that. It's looking into it." I left in a hurry, my mind racing. Why would that hallway show up on a security feed in a completely different building? And what was that shadow? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moment I saw the shadow, its movements sharp and unnatural, like it didn't belong in this world. Around 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep and decided to distract myself with some late night TV. But as I flipped through the channels, the screen suddenly went static. Then, for a split second, the corridor appeared. My heart stopped. It was the same view as the security feed, the same dim hallway, the same oppressive air. And then something stepped into frame. It wasn't a shadow this time. It was a figure, tall and impossibly thin, with arms that seemed too long for its body. Its head turned slowly, as if it could see me through the screen. I froze, unable to move or even breathe. Then it smiled, not with a mouth, but with a slow, twisty motion of its entire face. The screen went black. My TV refused to turn back on. The next day, I called out of work. My boss was annoyed, but I didn't care. I spent the day researching, trying to find any explanation for what was happening. I looked up the hospital, the pathology wing, and even the tech company where I'd seen the security feed. What I found left me cold. The pathology wing had indeed been closed years ago after a series of strange incidents. Staff reported hearing disembodied voices, seeing figures out of the corner of their eyes, and feeling like they were being watched. It was eventually shut down after a lab tech went missing, never found, not even a trace. As for the tech company, I found nothing unusual about the building itself, but one article caught my attention. The company had purchased some old security equipment from a liquidated hospital auction. The article didn't specify which hospital, but I had a sickening feeling I already knew. Since then, I've stopped delivery altogether. I'm working a desk job now, far away from hospitals, security cameras, and dimly lit corridors. But I can't shake the feeling that it's not over. Sometimes, late at night, I'll hear tapping, not at my window, but deep within the walls, faint and relentless. I try to ignore it, but every now and then, I catch myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see a long-limbed figure grinning back at me. I told myself that quitting the courier job and moving to a desk job would be the end of it, but the strange occurrences didn't stop. In fact, they began to escalate. At first, it was small things, lights flickering in my apartment, electronics behaving strangely, and the persistent feeling that I was being watched. My phone would buzz with notifications, only for me to find no new messages. When I tried to ignore it, the tapping sound returned, always faint, always in the walls. One night, I woke up to my phone vibrating violently on my nightstand. The screen was lit up with a notification, but it wasn't from any app I recognized. It was just a single message, glowing in the darkness. I stared at it, my heart pounding, before the screen abruptly went black. The phone wouldn't turn on again, no matter what I tried. I ended up smashing it out of sheer panic. I couldn't sleep after that. I sat in my living room with every light on, clutching a heavy flashlight for protection, even though I knew it wouldn't help. Around 4 a.m., the tapping started again. This time, it wasn't faint. It was loud, deliberate, and rhythmic, coming from directly behind me. I spun around, my flashlight beam shaking as I aimed it at the wall. Nothing, just drywall and paint. But the tapping continued, moving along the wall as if something was crawling inside it. I backed away, trembling, and tripped over my coffee table. When I hit the floor, the tapping stopped. The silence was suffocating. I lay there, too scared to move, until I heard it again, this time directly above me. A slow, deliberate tapping coming from the ceiling. I bolted. I grabbed my keys and ran out of the apartment, not stopping until I was in my car with the doors locked. I didn't know where to go, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I ended up driving to a 24-hour diner, parking in the back corner of the lot where I could see all the exits. I sat there for hours, watching the darkened streets and jumping at every shadow. Around dawn, as the sky began to lighten, I felt a strange sense of calm. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe I was finally starting to believe I'd imagined everything. But then I saw it. Across the parking lot, standing under a flickering streetlight, was the figure, tall and possibly thin, with arms that stretched too far, its body twisted at unnatural angles. Its face was smooth and featureless, but I knew it was looking at me. It didn't move. It just stood there, its head tilted slightly as if waiting for something. I couldn't breathe. My hand shook as I fumbled for the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the car into reverse, tearing out of the lot without looking back. I don't remember much of the drive, only that I kept going until I was well outside the city, stopping at a roadside motel where the clerk didn't ask any questions. I've been living here for a week now, jumping at every noise and barely sleeping. My old apartment, I'm not going back. My things, they could keep them, but here's the thing, I don't think running is going to help. Last night, I heard tapping again, not in the walls, but at the motel door. 3 soft, deliberate taps. When I peeked through the peephole, no one was there. I used to work the closing shift at a small town library. While the library itself isn't relevant here, since you don't want a story about a library, it's worth noting that we closed at 8 p.m. and by the time I finished tidying up and locking the doors, it was usually closer to 8:30. Our parking lot was small and poorly lit, a single street light at the far corner casting just enough light to make the shadows deeper. One chilly October evening, I was the last to leave. My coworkers had gone ahead, leaving me to double check the alarms. I stepped outside, locking the door behind me, and felt the sudden stillness stillness of the empty lot settle around me. The wind stirred dry leaves across the asphalt, and the sound echoed faintly in the surrounding quiet. As I approached my car, parked a little farther out than usual, I noticed something strange. A man was leaning against the trunk of the car next to mine. His head was tilted down as if he were texting, but something about his stillness seemed off. He didn't glance up or move as I approached, which only made me more uneasy. I hesitated for a moment, debating whether to walk back to the building, but the door was locked now, and the lot was empty except for the two of us. My phone was in my purse, and I didn't want to fumble for it, so I decided to walk to my car quickly, get in, and leave as fast as possible. As I reached for my car door, the man spoke. "Do you have a minute?" His voice was calm but too deliberate, like he had practiced saying it. "No, sorry," I said without looking at him, yanking the door open. "You dropped this," he said, and that made me freeze. My first thought was that he had picked up something from the ground, but when I glanced at him, his hand was empty. "No, I didn't," I said firmly, getting into my car. My hand shook as I pulled the door closed, and I reached for the lock button immediately. That's when he moved. He lunged toward my passenger side door, gripping the handle. I screamed, started the car, and floored it out of the lot. In my rearview mirror, I saw him standing there, staring after me. His face was completely blank. No anger, no frustration, just nothing. I called the police from a well-lit gas station a few miles away, shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. They sent someone to the lot, but by the time they got there, he was gone. Here's the thing that still keeps me up at night. The police found something on the passenger side door handle, a folded piece of paper tucked under the handle so you'd only notice it when you tried to open the door. It was a note, scrawled in large, jagged letters were the words, "You shouldn't have ignored me." After filing the police report, I couldn't shake the feeling that the man in the parking lot wasn't just a random creep. He felt deliberate, like he had been waiting there for me specifically. The officers assured me they'd increase patrols in the area and suggested I vary my routine in case I had been targeted. That thought alone was terrifying. Why would anyone target me? The following days were a blur of anxiety. I started asking coworkers to stay late with me, just so I wouldn't have to walk out to the parking lot alone. The first night I did this, my manager, Lauren, insisted on walking me to my car. As we approached, I felt my chest tighten when I saw something tucked under my windshield wiper, another note. Lauren noticed my hesitation and grabbed it before I could. She opened the paper and read it aloud, her voice trembling. "You made the right choice tonight." But I'm patient. We both froze. The parking lot was empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Lauren immediately called the police again, and I stayed at her house that night. I was too scared to sleep, and every small noise outside her window made my skin crawl. Over the next week, I became hyper-vigilant. I changed my parking spot, took different routes home, and even started carrying pepper spray. For a while, there were no more notes, and I hoped it was over. But then it escalated. One evening, as I left the library with a coworker, Megan, I spotted something on the driver's seat of my car. Through the window, I could see another piece of paper resting neatly on the seat. My stomach dropped. I hadn't left my car unlocked. I was sure of it. Megan stood guard while I unlocked the door, my hands trembling so badly it took a few tries to get the key in. I grabbed the note and unfolded it. Locks are just an invitation to try harder. I couldn't breathe. Megan pulled me away from the car, and we called the police yet again. This time, they dusted the car for fingerprints, but nothing came of it. The officers told me to take extra precautions, but they still had no leads. Whoever this was seemed to know how to avoid leaving any real trace. By now, I was completely paranoid. I stopped driving my car and started getting rides to and from work. My dad installed cameras around my house, and I started staying with friends whenever I could. Weeks went by without any incidents. Just as I was starting to feel like I could breathe again, it happened one last time. One night, I was sitting on my couch, scrolling through my phone, when I heard a soft knock at my window. It was so faint I almost thought I imagined it, but then it came again, 2 deliberate taps. My heart sank. My living room window faced the backyard, where there was no way someone should have been able to get in without jumping the fence. I didn't dare move. Instead, I grabbed my phone and called 911, whispering to the dispatcher what was happening. As I waited for the police, the tapping continued, slow and methodical, like whoever was there wanted me to know they weren't in a hurry. When the officers arrived and searched the yard, they didn't find anyone, but they did find another note taped to the outside of the window, right where the tapping had come from. This one said, "See you soon." I didn't sleep at all that night. The police set up patrols around my house for a few days, but nothing else happened. Eventually, I packed up and moved to another town, leaving behind my job, my house, and any sense of security I'd ever had. Moving to a new town was supposed to be a fresh start, but the fear followed me like a shadow. I rented an apartment in a secure building, the kind with keycard access and cameras in every hallway. I even made sure my unit was on the 3rd floor, thinking it would be harder for anyone to reach me there. Despite all the precautions, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The first few months were quiet. I threw myself into my new job and tried to rebuild some sense of normalcy. I didn't tell many people about what had happened, just a few close friends and family members who already knew the story. I didn't want to carry the stigma of being the paranoid new girl. Still, I kept my guard up. Every time I walked into my apartment, I double-checked the locks. I avoided routines, rarely taking the same route to work or running errands at the same time of day. Then, one evening, it happened again. I came home late after a work event, exhausted but relieved that the day was over. As I stepped into my apartment and closed the door behind me, I froze. Something was wrong. The air felt different, stale, like someone had been there. I scanned the room, my heart pounding. Nothing seemed out of place, no drawers open, no items missing. But then I noticed my bedroom door. It was ajar. I never left it open. I inched toward it, gripping my phone tightly. My thumb hovered over the emergency call button as I nudged the door open with my foot. The room was empty, but sitting on my neatly made bed was a single item, a small, black notebook. I didn't own a black notebook. Hands trembling, I picked it up and opened it to the first page. Scrawled in the same jagged handwriting as the notes before was a single sentence: "You can run, but you can't hide." I dropped the notebook and bolted out of the apartment, not even bothering to lock the door behind me. I ran down the hallway and straight to the building's security desk, where I demanded to see the footage from the cameras. The guard was kind but hesitant, insisting they needed approval from the property manager. I was frantic, nearly in tears, and finally he relented. We rewound the footage from earlier that evening, watching intently as people came and went. Then we saw it at 7:43 p.m. Just an hour before I got home, a man wearing a black hoodie and a baseball cap entered the building. He kept his head down, avoiding the cameras, but his movements were deliberate. He walked straight to the elevators, swiped something, a stolen keycard, maybe, and rode up to my floor. The footage didn't show him leaving. I felt like I was going to be sick. The guard immediately called the police, and within minutes, officers were swarming the building. They searched every unit, every hallway, every stairwell, but he was gone. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. The police took the notebook as evidence, but they had no solid leads. They advised me to stay somewhere else for a while, so I packed a bag and went to a friend's house. I couldn't sleep that night or the next. Every noise, every shadow felt like a threat. A week later, I received a call from the property manager. They had changed the locks on my unit and upgraded the building's security system. But what they said next chilled me to the bone. When they replaced the locks, they found something wedged inside the doorframe, a tiny wireless camera. It had been pointed directly at my living room. I moved out the next day. To this day, I have no idea who he was, how he found me, or what he wanted. I've changed my name, cut ties with most of my old connections, and moved to a new state. I don't post on social media, I don't go out alone, and I don't let my guard down. A few years ago, I was in a rush to find a new job after the company I worked for went under. I scoured local listings, online boards, and even community bulletins. That's how I came across the Midnight Flyer. The ad was tucked between lost cat posters and landscaping offers on a corkboard at a nearby coffee shop. It was printed in bold letters on glossy paper, seeking overnight courier, high pay, no questions asked, and number was listed below. Desperate for cash, I figured it was worth a call. A calm, professional voice answered and quickly explained the job. I was to meet a driver at a nearby industrial park at midnight, take a sealed package, and deliver it to a listed address by sunrise. I'd be paid in cash upon confirmation of delivery. Simple enough. The next night, I arrived at the industrial park, feeling the eerie stillness of the place. The black car with heavily tinted windows was idling near the entrance. The driver rolled down the window just enough to hand me a slim, unmarked package. "Don't open it," he said flatly. I was given an address about 200 miles away, a wad of cash for gas, and a disposable phone that would vibrate when I reached the destination. Then, the car drove off, leaving me alone under the flickering streetlights. The drive was uneventful at first, just long, dark highways stretching into nowhere. About halfway through, though, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. The car, a beat-up sedan, was trailing me. At first, I thought nothing of it. Maybe they were heading the same way. But every turn I took, every adjustment in speed, they followed. When I sped up, so did they. When I slowed down, they matched me. I finally decided to pull into a rest stop, hoping they'd just pass by. Instead, they pulled in behind me. My stomach dropped. I stayed in my car, gripping the steering wheel as I tried to figure out what to do. That's when the disposable phone in my passenger seat buzzed. The screen lit up with a single message: "Do not stop, do not engage." Heart pounding, I threw the car into drive and sped get out of the lot. The sedan followed, its headlights flashing erratically now. It felt like a nightmare. I didn't know if they wanted the package, my car, or me. After what felt like hours of cat and mouse driving, I finally reached the address, a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of a small town. The sedan had disappeared somewhere along the way, but my nerves were still on edge. I parked, clutching the package as I approached the door. A man in a black hoodie opened it before I even knocked. He didn't say a word, just took the package and handed me a thick envelope of cash. Then he shut the door. I drove home, shaken but relieved. I didn't take another courier job after that. A week later, I saw a news report about a man found dead in a burned out sedan on a highway near where I'd been followed. The reporter said foul play was suspected. After that night, I did my best to put the whole incident out of my mind. I told myself it was a one-off job, a desperate choice in a desperate time. But deep down, the unanswered questions gnawed at me. Who were those people? What was so important in that package that someone would risk their life or take someone else's to get it? Then, about a month later, it happened again. I was cleaning up my apartment when a knock came at the door. It was strange. I wasn't expecting anyone, and it was late, nearly midnight. When I opened the door, no one was there, but on the doormat sat a black envelope with my name written on it in neat, blocky handwriting. I didn't want to touch it. Just seeing it filled me with dread, but my curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a single piece of paper that read, "We need your help again. Same conditions, same pay." I stared at the note, feeling my stomach churn. There was no phone number, no contact information, just a location and a time. A desolate stretch of road outside the city. Tonight at 1 a.m. it was impossible they'd know where I lived unless they'd been watching me. I debated whether to go or to call the police, but the note had an unspoken threat. If I didn't show up, they might come back. So, like an idiot, I went. The road was pitch black and empty when I arrived. My headlights barely illuminated the surroundings, tall trees on either side, their branches clawing at the night sky. I parked, rolled down my window, and waited, anxiety clawing at me with every passing second. At exactly 1 a.m., another black car appeared out of nowhere, pulling up alongside mine. The window rolled down just a crack, and a gloved hand extended another package. This time, though, the driver spoke. His voice was low, measured, almost robotic. You know the rules. Same drop-off location. No stops, no questions. I took the package with shaking hands and nodded. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror, but the car was already gone. The drive was even worse than the first time. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching me. Every shadow on the road seemed to move. Every distant pair of headlights felt like they were following me. I couldn't tell if I was being paranoid or if the nightmare from the first job was repeating itself. When I finally reached the warehouse, the same man in the hoodie was waiting. He took the package, handed me an envelope of cash, and disappeared inside without a word. I stood there for a moment, staring at the door, wanting to scream at him for answers. But fear kept me silent. On the drive home, the disposable phone they'd given me vibrated. Another text appeared on the screen. "Thank you. Do not contact us again." That should have been the end of it. But the next morning, my car wouldn't start. When I opened the hood, I found the battery completely drained, wires snipped, and a single black feather tucked into the engine compartment. The feather wasn't from any bird I'd ever seen. It was massive, glossy, and faintly iridescent, like it belonged to something unnatural. I didn't keep it. I didn't want it in my house. I haven't heard from them since, but sometimes, when I'm driving alone at night, I catch glimpses of headlights behind me. They're always just far enough away that I can't make out the car, but they're there. Always following, always watching. For a while, life returned to something resembling normal. I avoided late night drives, didn't answer my door after dark, and stayed as far away from isolated areas as possible. I thought that maybe, just maybe, I was in the clear. But last week, something changed. It started small. At first, I thought my paranoia was just getting the better of me. I'd hear footsteps outside my apartment at odd hours or notice my curtains slightly out of place. Once, I found my front door unlocked, though I was certain I had secured it before bed. Nothing was missing, but I felt rugged. Then, 2 nights ago, I came home to find a single black envelope on my kitchen table. I froze. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely think. I hadn't let anyone in, and all my windows were locked. How had it gotten there? This time, the message was different. It ignored the rules. I didn't understand. I hadn't contacted them. I hadn't spoken about the jobs to anyone. I followed their instructions to the letter, but as I stood there, staring at the note, I realized something terrifying. They didn't mean I had broken the rules. They meant someone else had. The next day, I started getting phone calls from unknown numbers. At first, I didn't answer, but after the third call, curiosity or stupidity got the better of me. I picked up, but there was only silence on the other end. No breathing, no static, just empty, suffocating silence. I hung up, but the calls kept coming every hour on the hour. Then, last night, I woke up to the sound of my apartment door creaking open. My heart stopped. I grabbed the closest thing I could find, a lamp, and tiptoed toward the living room. The door was wide open, swaying gently in the breeze, but there was no sign of anyone. My apartment was empty, eerily silent except for the sound of my own breathing. And then I saw it, another black envelope placed neatly on my coffee table. This time, it was accompanied by something else, a photograph. The photo showed me sitting in my car, gripping the wheel during one of the courier jobs. I recognized the highway and the look of panic on my face. The note inside the envelope simply read, "One last delivery." They didn't include a location this time. No instructions, no package, just a warning. I don't know what they mean by one last delivery, but the implication is clear, they're not done with me. Today, I packed a bag and left my apartment. I don't know where I'm going, and I don't know if running will even help, but I can't shake the feeling that wherever I go, they'll find me. They always do. If you're reading this, let my story be a warning. Sometimes, desperation can lead you to doors you should never open. If you ever see a strange ad promising easy money, walk away. Burn the flyer, delete the email, throw out the card, and if you ever hear the words, "No questions asked," they'll just walk, run. This happened a few summers ago when I was staying at a small hotel on the outskirts of a beach town. I was traveling alone for some much needed relaxation, and the hotel was perfect, not too expensive, not too crowded, with a small but beautiful courtyard. In the center of that courtyard was an old, in-ground pool. It wasn't anything fancy, just a simple rectangular pool surrounded by some cracked tiles and a few lounge chairs. Oddly enough, I noticed something strange on the first day. The pool was always perfectly clean, its water crystal clear, but I never saw anyone using it. Families with kids stayed at the hotel, but the kids only played in the courtyard or ran down to the beach. Even when the sun was blazing and the ocean was far too rough, no one so much as dipped a toe in the pool. It struck me as strange, but I didn't think too hard about it until the third evening. It was hot, humid, and still, the kind of weather that makes your clothes stick to your skin even in the shade. The beach was packed, and I wanted somewhere quieter. Looking at the empty courtyard, I thought, why not? I hadn't brought a swimsuit, but the idea of cooling off was too tempting to resist. I figured I could wade it up to my knees and enjoy the silence. I slipped on some sandals and made my way down. The pool shimmered under the golden light of the setting sun. It really was pristine, like a postcard. As I stepped onto the tiles, I caught a whiff of chlorine, sharp and clean. Still, there was something off. The air around the pool felt heavier, like it was pressing down on me. I hesitated, chalking it up to the weather, then took another step forward. And then I saw it. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The water rippled faintly, even though there was no wind. Beneath the surface, something moved, a dark shape gliding smoothly, almost lazily. I froze, leaning in for a better look, when the shape stopped directly under my shadow. It was a hand, just a hand, floating palm up as if reaching for the surface. No body, no arm, just a pale, motionless hand. My breath caught in my throat. The pool water was so clear, I could see every detail, the knuckles, the faint wrinkles of the skin, even the slight curve of the fingernails. It didn't look like a severed limb or a prop, it looked alive, and then it began to curl its fingers, beckoning. I stumbled back, my heart racing. The tiles beneath my feet felt slick, and I nearly slipped. For a second, I thought about yelling for someone, but when I looked up, the courtyard was empty. I glanced back at the pool, and the hand was gone. Just like that, the water was calm again, rippling softly in the light breeze. I bolted back to my room and locked the door. I didn't sleep that night, my mind racing with explanations. Was it a trick of the light? My imagination? A swimmer who somehow vanished before I could see the rest of them? I wanted to believe any of those, but deep down, I knew it wasn't normal. The next morning, I decided to leave early. As I was checking out, I worked up the courage to ask the receptionist about the pool. She gave me a strange look, her polite smile faltering. "Oh," she said, looking uncomfortable. "We don't usually talk about it, but most people don't use the pool. There've been complaints. I pressed, feeling my stomach twist. She hesitated, then leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "Yes, I've seen things, felt things. We had someone say they were pulled under once, but..." She trailed off, shrugging as if to dismiss it. "It's an old pool, probably just stories." I left without saying another word. For a while after that trip, I tried to forget about the pool. I told myself it was a combination of the heat, exhaustion, and maybe even dehydration that made me see things. But late at night, when everything was quiet, I'd find my mind wandering back to that courtyard and that pale, lifelike hand reaching up toward me. About 6 months later, I was scrolling through social media when I saw a post that made my stomach drop. Someone had shared an article about that same hotel, and the headline read, "Tourist drowns in hotel pool, mystery deepens." The article described how a young woman staying at the hotel had been found dead in the pool early one morning by a maintenance worker. The official cause of death was drowning, but what made the case bizarre was that the woman wasn't a swimmer and had a deep fear of water. According to friends, she was traveling traveling with, she refused to go near the pool for their entire stay. The article included a detail that made my skin crawl. There were no signs of a struggle or any obvious injuries. It was as if she had willingly walked into the water and just let herself sink. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't a coincidence. The memory of that hand flashed in my mind. Was it possible it had been reaching for her, too, beckoning her like it had done to me? And what would have happened if I hadn't stepped back that day? Curiosity got the better of me, and I started digging. I searched online for any mention of the hotel or its pool, scrolling through forums, review sites, and obscure blogs. That's when I stumbled upon something chilling. A local history website had a short entry about the hotel, which had been built in the early 1960s. Apparently, before it became a hotel, the land had been a private estate owned by a wealthy couple. The story went that the wife had been found dead in the pool under suspicious circumstances. Some accounts claimed she drowned herself after a bitter argument with her husband, while others hinted at foul play. The husband sold the property soon after, and the estate was eventually converted into the hotel. But here's the kicker, there was a comment on the article from someone claiming to be a former employee of the hotel. They said the pool had always been a source of unease, even back when it first opened. Guests reported hearing splashing late at night when the pool was supposed to be empty. Some claimed they felt hands brushing against their legs when they swam. The hotel had apparently drained and refilled the pool several times over the years, but the strange occurrences never stopped. Reading this made my blood run cold. I wasn't just imagining things. There was something deeply wrong with that pool, and it wasn't going away. I don't know what's really happening there, and honestly, I don't want to know. I haven't been back to that beach town since, and I doubt I ever will. If you ever find yourself at a hotel with an empty pool that no one seems to use, do yourself a favor, stay away. Whatever's in the water, you don't want it to notice you. For a while, I thought I was done with the story. It haunted me, sure, but I convinced myself that as long as I stayed far away from that hotel, it couldn't touch me. I was wrong. It started with the dreams. The first one wasn't particularly scary, just unsettling. I was standing in the courtyard again, staring at the pool. The water was calm and still, reflecting the faint light of a full moon. But as I approached, the reflection shifted. It wasn't the moon or the sky anymore. It was me staring back, but the face in the water wasn't quite right. My reflection didn't blink when I did, and the corners of its mouth curved into a small, knowing smile. I woke up drenched in sweat. My heart was pounding, and I told myself it was just a nightmare, nothing more. But the dreams kept coming, and they got worse. In one, I was standing on the edge of the pool, frozen in place, while the hand from before rose slowly out of the water. This time, it wasn't a Loey. More hands appeared, pale and bloated, reaching up, clawing at the air as if trying to escape. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, like marionettes on invisible strings. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move. The hands grabbed my ankles and began to pull. I woke up gasping, my chest tight as if I'd been underwater. The sensation of cold, clammy fingers lingered long after I was awake. I started avoiding sleep, terrified of what I'd see next. The worst part, though, wasn't the dreams. It was the water. I began noticing puddles and strange places around my apartment. At first, I thought I was being careless, spilling water from the sink or leaving a glass tipped over. But the puddles were always in odd spots, the middle of my living room, under my bed, even on the seat of a chair I rarely used. They didn't make sense. Then came the sound. Late at night, when everything was quiet, I'd hear it, the faint, rhythmic slosh of water like someone treading in a shallow pool. It wasn't coming from the plumbing or outside. It was inside and close, always just on the edge of hearing. One night, I woke up to the sound of dripping. I sat up in bed, my heart racing, and saw a wet handprint on the wall next to my bedroom door. The fingers were long and thin, the print slightly smeared as if whoever left it had dragged their hand along the wall. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a bag and left my apartment the next morning, checking into a cheap motel across town. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. I stayed there for 3 nights, and nothing happened. No puddles, no sounds, no dreams. I started to think I left whatever it was behind, but on the 4th night, I came back to my room to find the floor soaked. Water pooled around the base of the bed, the edges of my bag, and the soles of my shoes. My heart sank. I knew what this meant. I'm writing this now from another hotel, one much farther away. I've moved twice already, but it doesn't seem to matter. Wherever I go, the water follows. It's been quiet for the last few days, but I know it's only a matter of time before it starts again. I don't know what it wants, or why it chose me, but if you've read this far, please listen to me, don't ignore the signs. If you see a hand in the water, or hear splashing where there shouldn't be, walk away. Run if you have to. Whatever it is, it doesn't let go. This happened about 3 years ago when I worked as a night security guard at a water treatment plant on the edge of my city. It wasn't the most glamorous job, but it paid the bills, and the hours let me avoid the usual chaos of daily life. My shift was from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and most nights were uneventful. I'd patrol the perimeter, check the cameras, and occasionally log maintenance calls. The plant was huge, sprawling tanks, endless pipes, and humming machinery, all surrounded by a tall chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. One night, just after midnight, the power went out. This wasn't unheard of, but it was rare. Usually, the backup generator kicked in immediately, but this time, nothing happened. The entire plant was plunged into darkness, the hum of machinery replaced by an eerie, all-encompassing silence. I grabbed my flashlight and radio, trying to stay calm. The main control room was at the far end of the facility, so I started making my way there to check the breaker panel. My flashlight cast long, jittery shadows on the walls, and every small sound, my footsteps, the rustle of my jacket, felt amplified. About halfway there, I heard something. It was faint, almost imperceptible at first, but it quickly grew louder, a metallic scraping, like someone dragging something heavy along the concrete floor. My heart raced. As far as I knew, I was the only one on duty. I called out, "Hello, is someone there?" My voice echoed back to me, but there was no response. The scraping stopped. I shone my flashlight in the direction of the sound, but the beam revealed only a maze of pipes and machinery. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I quickened my pace toward the control room, the unease growing with every step. When I finally reached the room, I found the breaker panel and saw that everything looked fine, no trip switches, no obvious issues. That's when I noticed the door to the electrical maintenance tunnel was slightly ajar. This was odd because I'd locked it earlier during my patrol. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open with my flashlight. The tunnel was narrow, lined with conduits and cables, and it stretched into the darkness. At the far end, I saw a faint, flickering light, like someone was using a weak flashlight or candle. "Who's there?" I called again, trying to sound authoritative. No answer. Instead, the light flickered once more and then went out. The metallic scraping started again, this time accompanied by a low, guttural sound, almost like a growl. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I backed away and slammed the door shut, blocking it again. My mind raced. Was it an animal? A person? I didn't want to stick around to find out. I radioed my supervisor to report the situation, but all I got was static. The combs must have gone down with the power. I decided to head back to the security office where I could lock the door and wait for help. As I retraced my steps, I heard the scraping noise again, this time much closer. It sounded like it was following me. I broke into a jog, my flashlight bouncing wildly, casting shadows that seemed to dance and writhe. When I reached the office, I slammed the door shut, locked it, and pressed my back against it, panting. The office had a small emergency battery pack for the security monitors, so I turned it on to check the cameras. Most of them were out, but one near the maintenance tunnel was still working. The screen showed a figure standing at the edge of the tunnel. They were tall, unnaturally so, and their head tilted slightly as if listening. They didn't move. They just stood there, staring directly at the camera. And then the screen went black. I don't remember much after that. When the power finally came back on an hour later, the maintenance crew arrived, followed by my supervisor. I tried to explain what had happened, but they found no evidence of anyone else in the plant. The tunnel was empty, and the camera footage was corrupted. They chalked it up to my imagination and the stress of being alone in the dark. After I quit the job at the water treatment plant, I did my best to move on with my life. I took a new job at a warehouse, working more regular hours, and tried to forget about the eerie night. But some things just don't leave you. About a month later, I started having nightmares. They weren't vivid, just unsettling. In the dreams, I was always back at the plant, wandering the tunnels. I could hear the metallic scraping and that low growling sound, but I could never see what was making it. Sometimes, I'd wake up drenched in sweat, convinced I'd heard the sound in my room. One night, I got a call from a former coworker at the plant. He sounded uneasy, almost scared, as he told me about a strange incident. The new night guard, my replacement, had gone missing. They found his flashlight and radio near the maintenance tunnel, but no sign of him. The last footage from the security cameras showed him walking toward the tunnel entrance. After that, just static. I wanted to dismiss it as a coincidence, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was connected to what I experienced. My coworker pressed me for details about why I left so suddenly, but I couldn't bring myself to tell him everything. What could I say? That something not entirely human might be lurking in the tunnels. A few weeks after that call, things got worse. One evening, while I was home alone, the power went out. At first, I thought it was a simple outage, but when I looked outside, the other houses on my street still had their lights on. That's when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of scraping metal, faint but growing louder. It was coming from somewhere inside my house. I froze, my heart pounding. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, scanning the room. The sound seemed to be moving, growing closer. I backed into a corner, clutching my phone, when I saw it, a shadow too tall and too thin to be a person, flickering just just at the edge of the light, its head tilted, just like the figure on the camera. I don't remember screaming, but my neighbors told me they heard me. One of them called the police, who found me huddled in the corner of my living room, shaking and unable to speak. There was no sign of anyone else in the house, but the officers noticed long, deep scratches on the hardwood floor, trailing from the back door to where I had been standing. After that, I couldn't stay in the house. I moved in with a friend and eventually left the city altogether. I've tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was stress, paranoia, or some elaborate prank. But deep down, I know better. After moving to a new city, I thought I'd finally left it all behind. The nightmares became less frequent, and for the first time in months, I started to feel like myself again. I avoided dark places, made sure every door and window was locked, and kept lights on in every room of my apartment. I even bought a dog, a big, protective German Shepherd named Max, thinking he'd keep me safe and give me peace of mind. For a while, everything seemed fine. Max was a great companion, and I started to believe the thing, whatever it was, had stayed behind. But deep down, I couldn't shake the paranoia. Every so often, I'd feel like I was being watched, like there was something just out of sight, waiting. Then, about 6 months after the last incident, it happened again. One night, I was walking Max in the park near my apartment. It was late, around 11 p.m., but the park was well lit, and I wasn't far from home. Max was usually calm and steady, but that night, he was restless, his ears perked up, and he kept stopping to sniff the air, growling low in his throat. "What is it, buddy?" I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. I scanned the park but didn't see anyone. The paths were empty and the trees barely moved in the light breeze. Then Max stopped dead in his tracks. His growl turned into a snarl, and he barked, a deep, ferocious sound that echoed through the quiet park. I followed his gaze and saw it. In the shadows beneath a cluster of trees, there was a figure. It was tall, impossibly thin, and its head was tilted at that same unnatural angle. The shadows seemed to cling to it, like it was part of the darkness itself. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Max lunged forward, barking furiously, straining against the leash. The figure didn't flinch or retreat. It just stood there, watching, and then it stepped closer. The way it moved wasn't right. It didn't walk. It seemed to glide, the shadows bending and stretching around it. The scraping sound started again, faint but unmistakable, like metal dragging against concrete. "Let's go, Max." I finally managed to choke out, tugging on his leash. He resisted for a moment, still barking, but then he turned and ran with me. We sprinted out of the park, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I didn't look back. When we got home, I locked every door and window, turned on every light, and sat in the corner of the living room with Max at my side. He wouldn't stop growling, his eyes fixed on the front door. I stayed awake all night, clutching a kitchen knife and jumping at every little sound. By morning, Max had calmed down, but I hadn't. I knew it wasn't over. Over the next few weeks, things escalated. I started finding scratches on my apartment walls, long, deep gouges that weren't there before. Max became more anxious, barking at nothing and refusing to go near the windows. My neighbors started complaining about strange noises coming from my unit at night, scraping, growling, and the sound of heavy footsteps. But I wasn't making those sounds. One night, I woke up to Max barking furiously at the bedroom door. When I turned on the light, I saw them scratches, fresh and deep, carved into the inside of the door. Whatever it was, it had been inside my apartment while I slept. I couldn't stay there anymore. I packed a bag, grabbed Max, and left that night, driving with no destination in mind. I've been living out of motels ever since, never staying in one place for more than a few days. Max and I are always on edge, always looking over our shoulders. And the worst part, it's not just the sounds or the scratches anymore. Sometimes, in the corner of my eye, I see it, a shadow that's too tall, too thin, and tilts its head just so. It's always there, watching, waiting. A few summers ago, I worked as a lifeguard at the community pool. It was a great job for a college student, lots of sun, decent pay, and I got to know pretty much everyone in the neighborhood. Most nights, I didn't have to work late since the pool closed at 9 p.m., but one week, I was assigned the closing shift. It wasn't bad, I just had to lock up and make sure everything was clean and secure before leaving. The pool was part of a larger rec center, and during my shift, I was the only one on duty. I remember it was a Tuesday night, and it had been unusually quiet, just a couple of families during the day and no one during the evening hours. By the time 8:45 rolled around, the place was dead silent, save for the hum of the pool filters. I was sitting in the lifeguard chair, scrolling on my phone, when I heard what sounded like a splash. It startled me because I was absolutely certain no one else was there. I stood up and scanned the pool, but the surface was perfectly calm. I figured maybe a leaf had fallen in or something small had shifted in the water. 10 minutes later, I was starting my lockup routine. I grabbed the pool skimmer to clear the water of any debris and walked around to inspect the fences and gates. As I passed the deep end, I felt the oddest sensation, like someone was watching me. I stopped and turned around, expecting to see someone, but again, there was nothing. The air felt heavy, like the kind of pressure you feel before a storm. I chalked it up to my imagination, finished my inspection, and headed to the locker room area to turn off the lights. As I flipped the switches, the reflection from the pool caught my eye. In the dim light, I could swear I saw a ripple, like something or someone was moving under the water. But when I stepped back out, the pool was still and empty. This was when I started to feel genuinely uneasy. I grabbed my bag and made my way to the main gate. I had just slid the padlock into place when I heard it, a loud, unmistakable splash, followed by the sound of something breaking the surface. My stomach dropped. I turned around and froze. There was a figure in the water, floating just beneath the surface, its shape distorted by the ripples. It didn't move like a swimmer. There was no kicking or arm strokes, just this unnatural, slow motion, like he was gliding. I called out, "Hey, the pool is closed. You can't be in there." The figure stopped. Slowly, its head broke the surface, and I'll never forget what I saw. It wasn't a person, not entirely, at least. Its face was pale, almost translucent, with large, hollow eyes that reflected the faint glow of the pool lights. It didn't say anything. It just stared at me, unblinking. My fight or flight instincts kicked in, and I ran to my car without looking back. I locked the doors, started the engine, and sped out of the parking lot. The next day, I told my manager what happened. He laughed it off, saying the pool was probably haunted. Apparently, there was a rumor about a drowning years ago, but I'd never heard it before. The thing about that experience is that it didn't end when I sped away that night. For the next few days, I felt like I was being followed. At first, I brushed it off as paranoia, but small things started to happen that made me second guess myself. The night after the incident, I was lying in bed, replaying everything in my head. Just as I started to drift off, I heard a faint dripping sound. At first, I thought it was coming from the bathroom, but when I got up to check, the faucets were dry. The sound continued, rhythmic and deliberate, and it seemed to be coming from somewhere closer, like inside my room. I looked around but found nothing. It stopped after a few minutes, but I barely slept that night. The next morning, I noticed something strange. My swimsuit, which I'd left hanging to dry in the bathroom, was soaking wet again as if it had just come out of the pool. I hadn't used it since my shift, so there was no reason for it to be wet. I told myself it was probably just damp from the humidity, but deep down, I knew that wasn't it. Things escalated the following evening. I was watching TV when I heard a splash from outside. I live nowhere near a pool or water, so the sound immediately put me on edge. I went to the window and peered out into the yard, but there was nothing unusual, just the shadows of trees swaying in the wind. Then I saw it, a faint, wet footprint on the concrete outside my back door. It was small, like a child's, but distorted, as though it had been made by something not entirely human. I slammed the curtains shut and spent the rest of the night curled up on the couch, lights on, TV playing softly in the background to keep me company. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, waiting. The final straw came 3 nights later. I was asleep when I was jolted awake by a loud banging sound. It was coming from the bathroom. Heart pounding, I grabbed my phone and crept down the hallway. When I opened the bathroom door, the entire floor was covered in water and the shower was running at full blast. But here's the thing, the water wasn't just filling the tub, it was rising up the walls, defying gravity. I stood there, frozen, as the water rippled and shimmered unnaturally. Then, from the corner of the mirror, I saw it. That face, pale, hollow-eyed, and staring right at me. It wasn't in the mirror, it was behind me. I ran out of the house without looking back. I drove to a friend's place and stayed there for the next few days, too afraid to go home. Eventually, I called in a plumber and pretended I had a serious water issue to explain the mess. He couldn't find anything wrong. I quit the pool job the next day and moved back in with my parents for the rest of the summer. To this day, I don't know what that thing was or why it seemed to follow me. I haven't been back to that pool since, and I never swim alone anymore. For months after I left that job, I couldn't shake the memories of what happened. I avoided pools altogether, even public ones, and the thought of swimming alone made my skin crawl. I started sleeping with the lamp on and always double-checked my doors and windows at night. It felt like overkill, but I didn't care. I just wanted to feel safe again. For a while, things seemed to settle. I moved back to college for the fall semester and kept myself busy with classes and work. Life returned to some semblance of normalcy, but just when I thought I could finally move on, it happened again. It was late October, and I was in the campus library finishing a group project. My teammates had left for the night, but I stayed behind to finish my portion. The library was nearly empty, and the sound of my keyboard echoed in the quiet. At some point, I realized I was thirsty, so I grabbed my water bottle and went to the nearest fountain. As I bent down to take a sip, I noticed something odd in the reflection of the stainless steel spout. The faint outline of a face, pale, hollow-eyed, and unmistakably familiar, stared back at me. My blood ran cold, and I whipped around, but there was no one there. The library was as silent as ever. I told myself it was just my imagination, a trick of the poor lighting and my tired mind. But when I returned to my desk, my laptop screen was fogged up, as if someone had been breathing on it. In the condensation, a single word was scrawled, "Soon." I packed up my things and bolted out of the library. I didn't even care about the strange looks I got from the night staff as I sprinted out the doors. Back at my dorm, I locked myself in and called my parents, desperate for some kind of reassurance. They tried to comfort me, suggesting I was stressed or imagining things. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just in my head. The worst incident came a week later. It was Halloween night, and I was at a party off campus. I had been trying to distract myself from the lingering fear, and for a while, it worked. The music, laughter, and bright costumes made me feel normal again. Around midnight, I stepped outside to get some fresh air. The backyard was dark and quiet, the party noise muffled through the walls. As I stood there, staring up at the stars, I heard a faint dripping sound behind me. I turned slowly, heart pounding, and saw it. A trail of wet footprints leading toward me. They started faint, almost unnoticeable, but grew darker and wetter with each step closer. My chest tightened as the dripping grew louder, closer, until I could feel the dampness creeping into the air around me. And then there it was, standing just a few feet away, its translucent skin glistening under the moonlight. Those hollow eyes bored to mine, and its mouth opened, releasing a gurgling, choking sound. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't move. It took another step closer, water pooling around its feet. Desperation took over, and I bolted back into the house, shoving past confused partygoers as I fled through the front door. I didn't stop running until I reached my dorm. I didn't sleep that night, and I spent the next few days jumping at every shadow and noise. I don't know what it wants, or why it's attached to me, but I've spent every day since trying to avoid water in any form. I take the quickest showers possible, refuse to go near fountains or pools, and carry a small bottle of salt in my bag, something I read might help ward off spirits or entities tied to water. This happened a couple of years ago when I had just moved to a new city for work. I was in my late 22nd and excited to explore my new surroundings. One evening, I realized I had run out of a prescription I needed. It wasn't life-threatening, but skipping doses wasn't an option. I decided to head out to find a nearby pharmacy. It was late, around 9:30 p.m., and most places were closing soon. After checking my phone, I found one about a 15-minute walk away that claimed to be open until midnight. Perfect. I bundled up against the chilly wind and started walking. The streets were oddly quiet for a city. The further I walked, the fewer streetlights there seemed to be. By the time I reached the area where the pharmacy was supposed to be, I felt uneasy. The neighborhood wasn't sketchy, but it felt off. The air was heavy, and every sound seemed amplified. My footsteps, the rustling of leaves, the distant hum of a car engine. When I arrived, I saw the sign, Hudson's Pharmacy. The letters were faded, and the glass windows were frosted, obscuring the view inside. The door was slightly ajar, which struck me as strange. I hesitated, but figured maybe someone had forgotten to close it properly. I stepped inside and was immediately greeted by a musty smell, like old books and something metallic. The lighting was dim, and the aisles were narrow and cluttered. There was a faint hum, possibly from an old refrigerator in the back. "Hello," I called out. No answer. The place felt abandoned, but there were items on the shelves, old, dusty boxes of cold medicine and faded pill bottles with labels I didn't recognize. A small bell sat on the counter. I hesitated but gave it a light tap. It let out a muted ding. From somewhere in the back, I heard shuffling. My stomach tightened. A figure emerged. A man, maybe in his 60 seconds, with thin, wispy hair and a hollow look in his eyes. He didn't say anything, just stared at me. "Hi, I need to fill a prescription," I stammered, holding up the bottle. He didn't respond, just reached for the bottle. Reluctantly, I handed it to him. He looked at it, then at me, then disappeared into the back without a word. Minutes passed. The silence was oppressive. My instincts were screaming at me to leave, but I didn't want to be rude or overreact. I glanced around the store, noticing that many of the products were way past their expiration dates, some by decades. Finally, the man returned, holding a small paper bag. He handed it to me, his hand trembling slightly. "How much do I owe you?" I asked. "No charge," he said in a flat, emotionless tone. I opened my mouth to protest but decided against it. "Thank you," I muttered and quickly left. As soon as I stepped outside, I felt like I could breathe again. The air was crisp and fresh, a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere inside. I didn't stop walking until I was back home. Once inside, inside. I opened the bag. Inside was a pill bottle, but it wasn't mine. The label had my name, but the pharmacy's name and address were completely unfamiliar. The pills inside were a strange, off-white color, and the bottle itself looked old, like it had been sitting on a shelf for years. I was freaked out. I decided to toss the bottle and forget about the whole thing. The next day, I called my usual pharmacy to explain what had happened and get a proper refill. The pharmacist seemed confused when I mentioned the name Hudson's Pharmacy. "There's no Hudson's Pharmacy in this city," she said. "Are you sure you didn't misread the sign?" I insisted that I had it and even described the location. She was quiet for a moment before speaking again. "That building's been empty for decades. It used to be a pharmacy, but it closed down in the late 90s. There was an incident, a fire. I think nobody's used it since." I hung up, shaken. I never walked in that direction again, and to this day, I have no idea what happened that night. I tried to push the incident out of my mind, chalking it up to some strange misunderstanding. Maybe I'd walked into a pop-up clinic or some unofficial operation that wasn't listed anywhere, but something about the old man's hollow stare and the eerie silence of the place kept creeping back into my thoughts. A couple of weeks passed, and life returned to normal. I refilled my prescription at my usual pharmacy, and things felt fine, until one night, when I woke up at exactly 3:13 a.m. to the sound of a faint tapping. At first, I thought it was a branch brushing against the window, but then I realized the tapping was rhythmic. 3 taps, a pause, then 3 more. It was coming from my front door. My heart started racing as I lay frozen in bed. I live on the 3rd floor of an apartment building with a secured entrance. No one could just wander up here. The tapping continued. Gathering my courage, I tiptoed to the door and peeked through the peephole. At first, I saw nothing but the dimly lit hallway. Then, slowly, a figure stepped into view. It was the old man from the pharmacy. He was standing impossibly still, staring directly at the peephole as if he could see me through it. His face looked even more gaunt and lifeless than I remembered, and his eyes his eyes were milky, as though he were blind. But somehow, I knew he wasn't. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. The tapping started again, louder this time. 3 taps, and pause, 3 more. I grabbed my phone and called the building's security desk. My voice was shaking as I explained that there was an intruder on my floor. The security guard assured me he'd come up right away and told me to stay inside. The tapping stopped abruptly. I waited in tense silence, listening for any sign of movement outside. After what felt like an eternity, I heard the elevator ding and the heavy footsteps of the security guard. I rushed to the door and opened it. The hallway was empty. The guard checked the stairwells and security cameras but found nothing. He told me he'd stay on patrol for the rest of the night, but his confused expression made it clear he thought I'd imagined the whole thing. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. At work, on the bus, even in my own apartment, I felt like someone or something was just out of sight. Then, the dreams started. They weren't nightmares, exactly, but they were unsettling. I'd find myself back in Hudson's Pharmacy, wandering the aisles, unable to find the exit. The old man would appear, his hollow eyes locking onto mine, and he'd whisper something I couldn't understand. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my sheets damp and twisted. One morning, I woke to find the same paper bag from the pharmacy sitting on my kitchen counter. I hadn't brought it in, I was sure of that. My apartment was locked, and there was no sign of a break-in. Inside the bag was the same strange pill bottle, only this time, the label had no name. It was blank. That was the last straw. I packed a bag and stayed at a friend's place for a few days while I tried to figure out what to do. I even considered moving, but the lease made it difficult. After a few weeks, things seemed to settle down. The strange tapping stopped, and I stopped having the dreams. I convinced myself it was all some bizarre coincidence, maybe even stress-induced. But then, last week, I was scrolling through my phone when I got a notification, a new text message from an unknown number. It was a picture of Hudson's Pharmacy. I froze, staring at the message. My hand shook as I tapped on the unknown number, hoping there might be some explanation. But when I tried to call, the line didn't connect. The number didn't even seem valid. It was as if the message had appeared out of thin air. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was someone playing a cruel joke, someone who knew about my experience. But I hadn't told anyone except my closest friend, Jenna, and she wouldn't have done something like this. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my couch with all the lights on, clutching my phone like a lifeline. Every creak of the apartment made me jump. Every shadow on the wall seemed to move. Around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed again. Another text. This time, it was a photo of my building. The shot was taken from the street below, angled up toward my apartment window. I dropped the phone like it burned me. Fighting a rising wave of panic, I crept toward the window and peeked out. The street was empty, the usual city hum eerily absent. But as I scanned the area, I spotted a figure standing under the street lamp across from my building. It was the old man. He didn't move. He just stood there, his face tilted upward, looking directly at my window. My stomach churned as I stumbled back, my mind racing. How had he found me? How was any of this even possible? I called the police, my voice trembling as I explained what was happening. The dispatcher assured me they'd send someone over, but by the time the officers arrived, the old man was gone. They took my statement, but I could tell they thought I was overreacting. One of them even suggested I install better curtains to help me feel safer. After they left, I considered packing a bag and leaving town entirely. But where would I go? The unease followed me like a shadow. No matter how far I ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that the old man, or whatever he was, would find me. The next day, I decided to face my fear head on. It was reckless, I know, but I couldn't live like this anymore. I needed answers. I called in sick to work, grabbed my keys, and drove back to the location of Hudson's Pharmacy. When I arrived, my stomach sank. The building was boarded up, the windows covered with wooden planks that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. The faded sign was still there, but the door was sealed tight, and weeds grew thick around the base of the structure. It looked completely abandoned. I walked around the perimeter, searching for any sign that someone had been there recently. Nothing. It was as if the place I had visited that night didn't exist, or at least, not in the way I remembered it. But as I turned to leave, I noticed something wedged between the boards covering the front door. A single, weathered piece of paper. I pulled it out, my hands trembling. It was a prescription slip. My name was printed at the top, along with today's date. The medication listed wasn't what I normally took. It wasn't even a real drug. It was just a series of numbers and letters that made no sense. Scrawled at the bottom, in handwriting that looked jagged and uneven, were 3 words. Don't come back. I didn't need to be told twice. I dropped the slip and ran to my car, my heart pounding like a drum. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. For a brief moment, I thought I saw the old man standing in the pharmacy's doorway, watching me leave. That was months ago. I've since moved to a different city, changed my phone number, and cut ties with anything that might lead back to that night. So far, I haven't received any more messages, and the dreams have stopped. But sometimes, late at night, I'll wake up to the faint sound of tapping. It's probably nothing, just my mind playing tricks on me. At least, that's what I tell myself. Alright, but that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But as always,
Have a nice day.